Imagine stepping into a world of magic and monsters, at an age when most people are settling down. That's exactly what Rick Gladiator does. He may be older than your average rookie, but don't let that fool you. This so-called newbie is about to shake up the entire Adventurers Guild. In a desolate wasteland, Rick gets flung several feet across the ground during a fight, seriously worrying he might kick the bucket. Just then, his mentors emerge from the smoke. Instead of offering first aid, they shower him with praise for his progress over the past 2 years of grueling training. They assure him he should breeze through the E-rank adventurer exams. In this world, adventurers are typically young due to the physical strain, but some adults, like Rick, never give up on their dreams. Determined, Rick heads to the reception desk to get his exam ticket. The receptionist, while confirming his details, recognizes Rick and excitedly reminds him that they used to know each other. Rick doesn't recognize her at first, but soon recalls they were co-workers 2 years ago. She was shocked when Rick abruptly resigned from his job to become an adventurer. Rick feels a bit embarrassed since most people start as G-rank adventurers in their teens and reach E-rank within a year or two. The receptionist asks what he's been up to, and Rick explains that he's been training in the mountains with his mentors for the past 2 years. Just then, the guild's usual drunkard approaches the desk and starts flirting with a receptionist. When she tries to decline, he gets rough, prompting Rick to step in and knock him out with a light tap to the stomach. The receptionist apologizes. Rick said, "It's fine," but he still doesn't understand why Gil serves alcohol. With that settled, Elisa finally hands Rick his exam ticket. To his dismay, Rick received the unfortunate number 4242. He heads outside where a maid named Rionette greets him. She asks if he's done with his registration, and Rick confirms, thanking her for waiting, expressing his excitement for the exam. Inside, the other adventurers are shocked by the handprint left on the drunkard's armor, which is made of dense steel. 2 guys recognize the drunkard from a mugshot and reveal he is Demal, an A-rank adventurer wanted for 30 counts of assault. The receptionist knows Rick is responsible, but realizes he may be overqualified if he can take out an A-rank adventurer. Meanwhile, Rick undergoes a physical exam and is measured to be about 5'8". The physicians are surprised he's taking the test at 32 years old. Next, the candidates are instructed to place their hands on a crystal ball to measure their mana levels. The orb glows according to their mana, with the highest result being a C. When Rick touches it, the orb barely lights up, earning him an F. The other candidates mock him, but as the examiner calls for the next candidate, the orb spontaneously shatters. The next test measures offensive abilities by striking a green rod, a special slime bag that absorbs impacts. Rick recalls training with a golden slime bag and being told by his mentor that he had to destroy it with his fists to become an adventurer. Despite his doubts, he trained relentlessly. Candidates line up to strike the bag, with the second son of the Derrier family impressing everyone with his Hellfire spell despite being only 11 years old. Rick, remembering his mentor's deadly fireballs, is shocked at the kid's seemingly powerful yet tiny fireball. When it's Rick's turn, the examiner questions if he's really over 30 and suggests he should quit due to his poor mana score and age. Rick feels judged and considers giving up but decides to give it his all. He winds up his punch, and the bag splatters everywhere, shocking everyone, including Rick. The kid, frustrated by Rick's success, vows to outperform him in the next test, which involves defensive magic. However, Rick effortlessly tanks a powerful nature spell, leaving the kid speechless. The examiner compliments Rick's skill, and Rick, doing his best, appreciates it. Rick has been giving it his all, relying solely on a first nature spell for defense. The examiner advises him to use higher-tier defensive magic, but Rick reveals that he only knows first-order spells and is truly doing his best. The examiner is shocked that someone with such precise mana control is limited to first-order spells. Rick assures him that his basic spells are sufficient for anything the examiner can throw at him. Taking this as an insult, The examiner prepares a fifth-order spell to show Rick not to underestimate him. A shock cyclone echoes through the kingdom, attracting Sylvester to the exam center. Sylvester learns that an F-rank adventurer, Rick, destroyed a slime bag with his bare hands and blocked a fifth nature spell using basic defense magic. Initially skeptical, Sylvester realizes the truth when he sees Rick confidently taking the written part of the exam. After the test, Rick tells Renette he's confident he aced the written part, thanks to his 14 years as a guild receptionist. However, he worries about his overall scores due to an F in his mana exam. Renette reassures him, but a kid named Freed angrily confronts Rick for outperforming him, ruining his chance to show off. Freed's sister, Angelica Doot, arrives and, seeing her brother upset, challenges Rick to a duel by throwing her glove. Unaware of the noble custom, Rick picks up the glove, accepting the challenge. Angelica, a second-class royal knight, sets the duel's penalty. The loser must serve the winner for life. Renette explains that a second-class knight is about B rank. Rick is nervous, but Renette encourages him, reminding him of his rigorous training. The duel begins, and Angelica uses her blink step to showcase her speed. However, Rick finds her movement slow and easily dodges her attacks. Angelica, frustrated, uses her special technique to move 3 times faster, but Rick still dodges effortlessly. She tries one last desperate attack but trips, and Rick's punch blows a hole in the ground, scaring Angelica. Realizing Rick's strength, she surrenders, forgetting her penalty. She runs away, and Rick, unconcerned about the bet, waits for his exam results. Renette informs Rick that his mentors are coming to check on him, causing him to panic as their presence always spells trouble. As Rick and Renette return to the exam center, anxiously awaiting the announcement of their results via their exam tickets. If the ticket glows blue, they've passed and move on to the second stage. Any other color means failure. Rick is nervous about his results, but Renette reassures him he did well. Rick appreciates her kindness, thinking if he were 10 years younger, he would marry her. However, she also shows her tough side, threatening to triple his training if he fails. Just then, Rick's ticket starts to glow. He picks it up and is thrilled to see he passed the first exam. As he and Renette leave the hall, a dreadful stench fills the air. A rich man approaches Renette, introducing himself as Raster Diremute, the eldest son of the Diremute family. Rick has dealt with 2 Diremute family members before, but this time Raster is here to pursue Renette. Rick tries to introduce himself, but Raster dismisses him and focuses on Renette, declaring his love for her personality and asking her to become his second wife. Rick intervenes, claiming Renette is his girlfriend. Raster notices Rick's exam card and mocks him for still being an F rank at his age. Rick retorts that Raster looks too old for the exam as well, but Raster reveals he passed at 14 and is now an A-rank adventurer and an instructor for the second part of the exam. Confident he has asserted dominance, Raster asks Renette to join him for dinner. Renette rejects him, saying the only man she'll go with is Rick, especially given Raster's overwhelming perfume. Furious, Raster vows to make Rick suffer in the exam and win Renette's love. After Raster leaves, Rick prays he won't have to deal with him during the exam. Rick notices that Renette is still clinging to him, so he jumps back in embarrassment and apologizes for calling her his girlfriend. Renette reassures him that it was fine, as he did it to fend off Raster, and it made her happy. Meanwhile, Raster is fuming because he couldn't win Renette over and lost to a middle-aged man. Just then, his 2 siblings, Freed and Angelica, approach him, complaining about an old man who messed with them during the exam. Freed mentions that the old man caused trouble, while Angelica says he beat her in a duel and wanted to make her his servant, despite her being the one who initiated the bet. Raster is outraged upon learning it was Rick who humiliated his siblings and sees an opportunity for revenge. Later, as the mock battles are about to begin, Rick is nervous. Renette advises him to hold back during the exam, but Rick doubts his own strength. He is also anxious about the possibility of Raster being in charge of his test. Just then, a man named Lynx arrives and informs Rick that he will be overseeing his exam. Rick is relieved, feeling one less thing to worry about. Lynx expresses admiration for Rick's determination to become an adventurer at his age and shares his own story of becoming a B-rank adventurer over 20 years. Inspired by Rick, Lynx is excited to test him in the mock battle, but warns he won't go easy on him. As Rick and Lynx part ways, Raster lurks nearby with a sinister plan. Soon after, Lynx mysteriously falls ill, and it is announced that Raster will be taking over Rick's exam. Rick starts to panic, and Renette suspects Raster pulled some strings to make this happen. Other examinees confirm Raster's reputation for enjoying tormenting F-rank adventurers, and Rick realizes he's in serious trouble. Raster, meanwhile, is outside tormenting another examinee, but his fun is interrupted by a message from the elite guard. Inside, Rick paces anxiously as his turn approaches. Renette encourages him, reminding him of his potential and her belief in him. A cloaked boy then offers Rick a free fortune-telling, but Renette spots a magic circle on the chair and tries to warn Rick. It's too late, as Rick is teleported away. The cloaked boy reveals himself to be Freed, gloating over his successful trap. However, Renette, furious, demands to know Rick's location. After some intimidation, Freed reveals Rick is nearby, no more than 100 meters away. Rick, having appeared near a river behind the training center, is confronted by the elite guard of the Diremute family. Realizing Raster's involvement, Rick prepares to fight but is outmatched. Suddenly, Rick's senior party members appear, scaring him more than the elite guard. They ask why he is there instead of at his exam. Rick lies, saying the elite guard was helping him train. The leader of the elite guard orders his team to attack, but the party members easily overpower them. They quickly subdue the elite guard, with Mizette using a rifle and Alice vaporizing an attacker who tried to take her hostage. Realizing the strength of Rick's party, the elite guard's leader decides to retire immediately. Rick returns to Renette after she deals with Freed, and they find Lynx, who had been beaten up by Raster. Lynx had shared his dream of building a school for children in his village, only for Raster to mock him and beat him up. Rick, now filled with determination, vows to defeat Raster. Meanwhile, Raz was busy tormenting the poor trainees in the yard. A man perched on the benches above laughed at the chaos unfolding below. This was Adolf, a man blessed with a unique talent. He could see people's core stats, revealing their abilities in physical strength, magical strength, speed, and dexterity. With a smirk, he scanned each participant facing Raz, predicting how spectacularly they'd be obliterated. One more unlucky trainee with average stats stepped up and was immediately fried by Raz's lightning magic, sending Adolf into hysterics. Feeling nosy, Adolf checked Raz's stats, which nearly blinded him with their sheer power. Only an A-rank adventurer could have such insane magic reserves. However, when he glanced at Rick, he was in for a shock. The old man's stats were maxed out in everything but magic, and just looking at them made Adolf's eyes feel like they were being stabbed by needles. Across the stadium, Rhea spotted Alyssa and invited her to join her party. Alyssa hesitated upon seeing an orc and a demon vampire among the group, but Rhea assured her they were harmless. The orc asked Rhea what she thought about Rick's chances, and Rhea confidently predicted Rick would pass the exam without breaking a sweat. Alyssa, still unsure, pointed out that Raz was a powerful A-rank adventurer who dominated weaker trainees with his superior magic. The orc initially looked worried, but when he heard Raz's rank, he relaxed, figuring that Rick would handle it. On the battlefield, Raz taunted Rick, praising him for getting past his guards but warning him not to get cocky. Raz, a proud duke from the Northern Kingdom, was clearly not impressed by commoners or adventurers. When Rick asked why he became an adventurer, Raz smugly replied that he was a genius who simply wanted to add the title to his resume to boost his noble family's prestige. However, it was clear he saw adventurers as little more than peasants. The fight began with Raz launching an ice blast at Rick, who stood still. Raz laughed, thinking Rick was scared, and prepared to finish the fight quickly. He unleashed a powerful flame attack, but to everyone's shock, Rick emerged unscathed. Aliso was stunned, while the orc explained that Rick trained for physical toughness, unable to grow his magic power after age 20. Rick had endured brutal training, including running through a forest with 100 kilograms ankle weights. Growing frustrated, Raz used stronger spells, including wind and lightning magic, but Rick withstood them all. Aliso learned from Rhea that Rick was as strong as an S-ranked adventurer, though he didn't realize it himself. The orc had tricked Rick during training, making him believe he was weaker than he actually was. In a last-ditch effort, Raz combined multiple elemental attacks, confident he had finally defeated Rick. However, Rick emerged unscathed and effortlessly split a giant boulder in half. Shocked, Raz reinforced his body with magic and charged at Rick with extreme speed. Rick remained calm, landing a lazy punch that sent Raz flying. Regaining his balance, Raz was bewildered and frustrated by Rick's resilience. Rick realized that despite Raz's impressive mana reserves, his skills were unrefined and inefficient due to always getting what he wanted easily. Every move of this noble brat seemed like a dumpster fire to Rick, boosting his confidence immensely. Finally taking Rick seriously, Raz unleashed his strongest fire magic, but Rick effortlessly blocked it with his hand. Enraged, Raz attempted a sneak attack, only to be counterpunched by Rick. Raz managed to reinforce his body with steel magic just in time to avoid serious injury. Despite this, he refused to acknowledge Rick's skills, dismissing it all as mere coincidence. This infuriated Rick, who recalled his brutal training, surviving in a dragon's nest, enduring explosions, drowning in venomous ponds, being pushed off cliffs, crushed under rocks by Alice, and hit by falling logs during training with Rhea. Only through the orc's special healing magic, capable of reviving recently deceased individuals, did Rick manage to push his limits. Back in the arena, Raz used earth magic to bind Rick with strong roots and summoned a tree golem to finish him off. Unfazed, Rick used a basic but perfectly practiced air shot spell to break free from the roots and clash with Raz in the middle of the arena, creating a shockwave that astonished everyone. Initially confident, Raz was stunned as Rick's air shot overwhelmed his magic, causing the tree golem to explode and knocking Raz unconscious. Later, Rick rejoined his friends, who congratulated him on passing the test. Before they could celebrate with lunch, Raz approached with his siblings, vowing to be Rick's examiner for his promotion exam and promising to defeat him next time. As Raz walked away, Rick and his friends awaited the unveiling of the passing adventurer's results that evening, pondering the adventures that lay ahead. Flashback to Rick's childhood. Getting lost in a book about a hero taking on the ultimate monster, Kaiser Alpi, to nab the Akashic records. The hero, of course, flopped spectacularly and left the records for future adventurers. Young Rick decided right then and there he wanted to be an adventurer. His mom, however, suggested a safer career path, while his dad bluntly told him to get a real job before throwing his life away. One day, during a routine checkup, Rick's doctor dropped a bombshell. Rick had an innate skill, a rare trait akin to Yamato, the hero from his beloved book. The catch? It would take some time to manifest. Ever the optimist, Rick was over the moon, seeing this as his golden ticket to adventuring glory. Rick eagerly shared the news with his friends, but as days turned into weeks, and then months, his innate skill remained as elusive as a unicorn. His friends, being the supportive bunch they were, suggested he pursue adventuring anyway since most adventurers didn't have innate abilities and still made decent money. But Rick's dream wasn't about the money. It was about being a hero like Yamato. Realizing he couldn't achieve that, he reluctantly decided to get a real job. His parents were thrilled with his decision. Rick spent the next few years working as a receptionist, watching adventurers live out his dream. Over time, he became jaded but accepted his life, finding solace in the company of friends and family. One day, he stumbled upon his old storybook about Yamato, now just a relic of his childhood dreams. At work, Rick helped Alyssa, a new hire, and warned her about the increased monster activity. One of Rick's adventurer friends proudly flaunted his new B rank status, making Rick both happy and envious. To cope, Rick turned to his favorite pastime, drowning his sorrows in booze, wondering what could have been if he had pursued adventuring. Amid his musings, a commotion in town caught Rick's attention. A mid-rank hand troll was causing chaos, and despite his fear, Rick couldn't ignore a woman in its path. As he braced for a heroic but gruesome end, Renette, an S-rank adventurer, swooped in and effortlessly dispatched the troll. She told Rick not to worry about her safety and introduced herself. Impressed, Rick asked if she was a B-rank adventurer. Renette revealed her S-rank status, leaving Rick flabbergasted. He shared his childhood dream of adventuring and asked if it was still possible at his age. Renette, noting his courage, explained the crucial role of mana reserves, which are nearly impossible to build as an adult. Rick, though expecting this answer, still felt the sting. Finding solace in the fact that an S-rank adventurer gave him the truth, he decided to settle into his ordinary life. Renette apologized if she hurt his feelings, but Rick appreciated her honesty, finally finding closure. Plus, it's not every day he gets to meet a lady as pretty as Renette, so he jokingly invites her to grab a meal with him sometime. Surprisingly, Renette immediately agrees and offers to meet him the next day. Rick is on cloud 9 and decides to work even harder, even wishing his friend Zaid luck on his next quest without a hint of jealousy. By the end of the day, Rick is practically skipping to meet Renette, hoping their date might lead to something more. But just as he's about to meet her, he hears screams. Monsters are attacking. Rick's date plans go up in flames. Assuming Renette is already fighting, he rushes to check on her. She's holding her own, but with more monsters approaching, she asks Rick to stand back while she handles it. Moments later, the battlefield is covered in monster chunks, and Renette looks barely warmed up. However, she suddenly collapses, haunted by traumatic flashbacks. A monster shows up as Renette has a panic attack, and Rick, unprepared to defend her, is saved at the last second by Zaid. More adventurers arrive, and Zaid explains that the guild issued an emergency quest. He tells Rick to get Renette to safety. As Rick realizes his deep-seated jealousy, Renette warns him of an imminent danger, a dragon. Rick is skeptical until a dragon flies overhead. Panic ensues as a magician breaks protocol and attacks the dragon, leading to the B-rank group being decimated. Trapped in a barrier the dragon created, Rick, feeling the fire of his long-buried dream reignite, decides to face the dragon head-on. Picking up a rock, he throws it at the dragon, motivating the other adventurers to join the futile effort. The dragon retaliates with its fiery breath, and Zaid protects everyone with his iron body skill, but they still suffer significant damage. Rick, barely alive, walks towards the dragon, determined to make his dream come true. As the dragon steps on him, his dormant innate skill awakens, allowing him to survive and push the dragon away. Overflowing with magical energy, Rick blocks the dragon's fire and counters with a punch that kills the dragon instantly. After the battle, Rick collapses and wakes up in a hospital bed a week later, in great pain. Renette informs him that he overloaded his magic circuits and should be dead. She has been waiting by his bedside to invite him to join Orichalcum Fist, a party aiming to defeat Kaiser Alpi. Moved to tears by Renette's faith in him, Rick finally feels supported in his dream of becoming an adventurer. And that brings us back to the present, where Rick has just officially passed his E-rank exam, and for the first time in his life, he can proudly say he's an adventurer, with Rick visiting Lynx in the hospital after his exam results are announced. Lynx congratulated him and excitedly asked if they were still on for drinks. Rick was pumped until Lynx mentioned visiting his home. Suddenly uneasy, Rick joked that Lynx should wear his best armor for protection. Lynx, confused but intrigued, shrugged it off and headed over. When Lynx arrived, he was shocked to discover that Rick lived in a demon lord's castle. Inside, the place was surprisingly nice, and Rick apologized for the long trek. Lynx mentioned he hadn't seen any monsters along the way, to which Rick replied that they tended to avoid the castle, though Lynx's armor was more for protection from the chaos within. As they stepped inside, Rynette welcomed Lynx, and Alice came charging down the stairs, accidentally launching a massive lightning spell at him. Rick pushed Lynx out of the way, leaving a gaping hole in the wall. After scolding Alice for her magical mishap, Rick reminded her of the no magic rule indoors, although he knew she'd probably forget the moment she got bored. Rick encouraged Lynx to explore the castle while he played with Alice. Feeling overwhelmed, Lynx looked out the window and spotted Mazette working on some impressive military-grade weapons. Curious, he approached Mazette, who welcomed him and introduced him to a weapon he affectionately called Patricia. Lynx was blown away when he pulled the trigger, realizing just how powerful it was. Continuing his exploration, Lynx stumbled upon Braun's room, where he found an orc surrounded by books. Braun explained his love for reading, though he had been too busy training Rick to catch up on his collection. When Lynx expressed interest in training with Braun, the orc agreed, clearly amused by Lynx's enthusiasm. Later, Rick went looking for Lynx, hoping to grab those drinks, but Mazette informed him that Lynx had gone into the forest with Braun. Alarm bells rang in Rick's head. He knew Braun's training methods could be dangerous. Meanwhile, Lynx was precariously perched on the edge of a cliff with heavy weights tied to his ankles. As he fell, convinced he was done for, he began saying his goodbyes, but thankfully landed belly first on a boar Rynette had been eyeing for dinner. Once safe, Lynx thanked Rynette, who recognized Braun's handiwork and asked if he had pushed him off the cliff. Lynx confirmed, explaining Braun had told him to run down the cliff with weights before sending him flying. Lynx expressed how close he felt to death, and Rynette warned him that Braun was notorious for getting Rick killed during training. Eventually, Lynx was dragged back for more training. By the end of the day, he was exhausted but alive. When Rick found him, he asked why Lynx had agreed to train with Braun, knowing the risks. Lynx replied that Braun promised him light training, but Rick cautioned him never to trust Braun's word. He also warned Lynx about Alice's antics and Mazette's seriousness, but the others shrugged it off, saying this was just how things were. Later, while sipping tea and waiting for dinner, Lynx complimented Rynette's cooking and questioned Rick about his relationship with her. Rick insisted there was nothing romantic, citing their age difference. Lynx called him out, saying he saw the affection in Rick's eyes and encouraged him to express his feelings. When dinner was served, Lynx praised Rynette's cooking as the group devoured the meal, requesting seconds. With Rick distracted, Lynx turned to the others to chat. Meanwhile, Braust informed Lynx that Rick's innate skill, *reckless soul*, could only activate under specific conditions. If it ever kicked in, Rick would easily surpass everyone else. When Rick and Rynette returned, Braust had a question for Lynx about the 6 magical stones, known as the jewels, said to be essential for defeating Kaiser Alipate. Lynx recognized them from legends but thought they were mere tales. However, since Rick took them seriously, he offered to check the Central Agency's confidential information. After that, Rick sought more relationship advice from Lynx, admitting his previous attempts with Rynette hadn't gone well. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild, a girl named Rye was mopping the floors, feeling unsatisfied with her menial task. Suddenly, she overheard Rick and his team requesting a quest. Unfortunately, they needed a party of 4 with at least 2 A-rank adventurers. The guild master suggested finding a random person to join them, and Rye, eager for real adventure, was invited to fill the spot. Unfazed by the odd team makeup, Rye introduced herself and agreed to join. As they set off, Alice detected something in the air. Rye asked what they were searching for, and Rick explained they had a tip about a magic stone nearby. Rye was intrigued but warned that it could be dangerous. Confident in her abilities, she claimed she could handle any monster, despite being only F rank. Soon, Alice spotted a wyvern, precisely what they were after. Rye panicked, knowing how powerful wyverns were, but Braust simply slapped the creature away to summon reinforcements. Tired of her whining, Brost asked Rick to take Rye somewhere else. As they walked out of the forest, Rye scolded Brost for attracting wyverns, but soon they heard the sound of wyvern bodies hitting the ground. Brost and Alice had jumped into action. Stunned, Rye nearly got taken out by a red wyvern. Rick saved her just in time, but she was still terrified, realizing a rank adventurers struggled against such beasts. However, Rick then walked up to the red wyvern and knocked its head off with a single punch, leaving Rye utterly speechless. The next day, Rye reflected on her experience and was glad to see the guild master, who expressed relief at her survival. He informed her that Rick's team was the strongest on the continent, composed entirely of S-rank adventurers. Inspired, Rye vowed to train hard until she could reach S-rank herself. She handed her broom to the guild master, eager to start training. Meanwhile, after returning from the wyvern hunt, Rick and his team successfully retrieved one of the jewels from the wyvern's den. Thanks to this treasure, Mazette pinpointed the next jewel's location in Herotopia, a city famous for its colosseums and powerful fighters. The story continues as Rick, Orc, and Rhea arrive in the bustling kingdom of Herotopia. Orc shares the legendary tale of the first King Alexander, who began with nothing but a small arena and his bare fists. With a jaw-dropping 10 seasons and win streak, Alexander's raw power attracted fighters and spectators from across the globe, transforming Herotopia from a fledgling kingdom into a thriving hub of martial arts. Orc's eyes gleam with anticipation, eager to witness the kingdom's elite fighters in action. But first, he's determined to hunt down the 6 grand orbs thereafter. As they seek directions, the locals' reactions to Orc are less than welcoming, but they're soon distracted by a commotion involving a cat girl named Millie and a bald thug named Gold. Rick steps in to help, but Orc, flexing his muscles and oozing confidence, handles the situation with a swift and decisive beatdown. The defeated thug, now compliant, introduces himself with an awkward bow, confirming that the orb they seek is embedded in the belt of Kelvin, the reigning champion of the Fist King tournament. Rick and Orc exchange impressed glances at the mention of Kelvin's impressive undefeated streak. Gold and Millie are anxious as they confirm the orb's location. Kelvin, mistaking Rick for a fan, quickly realizes he's up against a worthy opponent. However, Kelvin's hesitation to part with his prized belt leads him to challenge Orc to the tournament. Orc accepts the challenge, opting to first conquer the East and West regional tournaments. Rick and Rhea head west while Orc sets off for the Eastern qualifiers in a lavish carriage with Gold. Rick's first challenge is a selection test, where his opponent, Angelica the bratty knight from their previous encounter, looks confident, but quickly realizes she's outclassed. Despite her frustration, she bows out gracefully, letting Rick advance to the Western qualifiers. Later, Angelica, still miffed, confronts Rick in a tearful showdown. To lift her spirits, Rick invites her to dinner at Millie's family inn. Millie, clearly disappointed by Orc's absence, listens as Angelica warns Rick that the Fist King tournament is no cakewalk. It requires at least 40 matches, typically stretching over 6 months. The following day at the qualifiers, Rick is warned about his upcoming opponent, known for using prohibited weapons. Despite thorough checks, the opponent, a crooked fighter wielding an impact stone that amplifies his punches, attempts to blind Rick with his coat and strike him. However, Rick, unimpressed, easily dodges the attack, letting the crook injure himself. Rick then nonchalantly uses a shockwave punch to knock him out without breaking a sweat. Rick wins his first match and gears up for the remaining 39. Angelica faces a karate practitioner next. With a dazzling display of her blink step and a swift back kick, she clinches victory by throwing her opponent into a wall. Outside the arena, Rick congratulates Angelica for qualifying after beating all 40 opponents. Angelica is astounded and warns Rick of the grueling challenge ahead. Unperturbed, Rick quips about his next arena being a mere 30 kilometers away and takes off at lightning speed, leaving Angelica wide-eyed. Rhea and Angelica travel via rooftop leaps to the next arena, arriving just in time to witness Rick's victory. Rick breezes through his remaining fights, employing shockwaves and super speed to outmaneuver his opponents. After 4 days of relentless matches, Rick's victory streak amazes Angelica, who is relieved he's not in her block. Rhea mentions Rick's formidable trainer, Orc, and Angelica realizes she's up against an elite fighter group. She asks about Rick's whereabouts, only to learn he's out on a 600 kilometers jog, which seems like a stroll to Rhea. That evening, Rick meets Snape, the Lizard Man chairman of the West League Committee. Snape congratulates Rick on setting a record and warns him about potential shady dealings. Puzzled, Rick heads to Millie's restaurant, where she warns him about Snape's unsavory connections. Overhearing gossip about a dark elf bunny girl, a description that fits Rhea, Rick rushes to the stadium, finding Rhea and Angelica in bunny costumes promoting gambling. Rick is taken aback by Rhea's costume and questions the gambling promotion. Back at the gym, Discount Nick Fury reads about Orc's astonishing feat of 40 wins in just 2 days. As Kelvin excitedly shares the story of Rick winning 40 bouts in 4 days, a remarkable feat, it brings back memories for his mentor. Reflects on how he found Kelvin in a shady town and offered him a shot at a better life through gladiatorial arenas. The next morning, as Rick, Rhea, and Angelica sit down for breakfast, Angelica grows tense when Rick mentions Snape. She becomes visibly stressed but avoids elaborating. During the first main match, Angelica faces off against Sam Sewell's sister, pushing through her strain to secure a win with a powerful kick. Rick, in his match, faces a wind magic user. Despite the opponent's magical efforts, Rick swiftly evades and dispatches him with a barely there karate chop. Matches proceed swiftly, with both Rick and Angelica advancing. By evening, Angelica, exhausted from the day's fights, is skeptical about her next opponent. Rick offers to train her, and Angelica, though hopeful, is wary. Later, Angelica's match kicks off against a human bulldozer. She's faster, but her attacks barely make a dent. Desperate, she tries some magic water prison, lightning strike, but the big guy's still standing, taunting her. Out of gas, she's quickly knocked out. Afterward, Rick finds her and suggests she was too hasty. Grudgingly, Angelica spills the tea. Her parents died, leaving her and her siblings broke. Grandpa made a shady deal, trading her engagement to Snape for some quick cash. Now Snape's rigging the tournament to make bank, and Angelica entered to stop him. As they investigate a commotion in a tavern, they find Jeeth, a red lizard man, choking a waitress. The large man who previously defeated Angelica tries to intervene, but is overpowered by Jeeth. Angelica, despite the danger, steps up, but Rick intervenes. Snape arrives, explaining Jeeth's temper and promising to make amends. Angelica suspects Snape of match-fixing and manipulating the tournament for profit. She reveals her motive to defeat Snape's fighter and expose his scheme. Rick offers to train her for the upcoming matches, leaving her with a glimmer of hope amid the mounting challenges. With Rick preparing to train Angelica, but not before warning her that this is going to be tougher than anything she's ever faced. Angelica, full of determination, tells him not to hold back, ready to prove herself in the face of whatever brutal regimen Rick has in store. Impressed by her determination, he ties weights to her hands and legs and announces they'll begin with a 30 kilometers run. When she questions the unusual method, he ignores her, telling her to use her strengthening magic if she doesn't want to die. As he takes off at full speed, dragging her behind him, Angelica is left bewildered and helpless. Rick explains that this intense training is meant to acclimate her body to rapid movement. Though she's initially panicked, Rick keeps pushing, telling her the key to success is speeding up just when it feels impossible. 6 grueling hours later, Angelica is sprawled on the ground, barely able to comprehend how she survived. Rick, unfazed, mentions that his own training involved dying 3 times on the first day. Angelica, dazed but somewhat proud, is horrified to learn that the day's training is only halfway done, with more to come after lunch. 5 days into the brutal training, Angelica has had enough. She flees to a remote cafe, convincing herself it's a tactical retreat to preserve her sanity. But before she can even finish her meal, Rick appears, much to her shock. He casually joins her for coffee, acknowledging her desire to escape. He reveals that during his own training, he ran away countless times and even died thousands of times under his mentor's watch. Despite the torment, he realized that the regret of giving up would be far worse than the pain he was enduring. Inspired by Rick's story, Angelica confesses her disdain for noble traditions and her dream of becoming the first special-class female knight. Reinvigorated, she vows not to give up. Rick then reveals that he's arranged for a special instructor to help Angelica hone techniques that turn her hands into swords, as weapons are prohibited in the upcoming tournament. The scene shifts to Angelica's final match to secure a spot in the main tournament. Her opponent is Silva Hant, and both have one loss each. Angelica's friends notice she seems different today. The match begins, and to everyone's astonishment, Angelica defeats Silva with a single powerful kick. However, she remains in a trance, continuing to fight even after the match is over, forcing the referees to step in. Later, back at the inn, Angelica comes to her senses but feels uneasy about the strange looks she's receiving from the townsfolk. Rick, unconcerned, points out that the important thing is she won. The group discusses rumors about an orb being in the Empire, but they soon discover the news was false. That evening, they all gather for dinner, where Rick advises Alisar against participating in the tournament, given the risks involved. After finding out that Angelica is competing in the tournament, Braun is curious to learn about her training. Angelica proudly reveals she's been learning under Rick and Rionette. Rick praises her as a fast learner with natural talent, but Angelica isn't entirely confident she's had enough time to prepare. Braun reassures her that hard work never betrays, and Mizette chimes in, encouraging her to trust her efforts. With everyone cheering her on, Angelica's mood lifts. The scene shifts to the start of the main Fist King tournament. The announcer, with her usual flair, congratulates the participants and reveals that the matchups have been decided by an impartial lottery. First up, Geese vs. Herman Muller, followed by Angelica vs. Doug Heap. Rick's match is against Serena Kane, and he's relieved he would have surrendered on the spot if it were Braun. Braun himself is set to face Donnie Fisher, much to Militia's delight. When Eddie Grace is announced to fight the reigning champion, Kelvin, the betting booths open, and the crowd goes wild. Angelica, sensing something off, points out to Rick that Geese's path to the finals seems suspiciously obstacle-free, clearly orchestrated, so he won't face tough opponents until the final showdown. Rick and Angelica speculate that Snape plans to hype Geese up only to bet against him in the finals, making a killing when Geese throws the match. Angelica, ever the determined fighter, vows to derail these plans by defeating Geese in the second round. Rick teasingly asks what she would have done if she had faced Geese in the final, but Angelica is caught off guard, realizing she hadn't thought that far ahead. Rick and Braun head to the stands, where they bump into Kelvin. Braun, ever the competitor, declares he's gunning for Kelvin's championship belt. Kelvin's master observes his fighter's determined expression, reminiscent of his early days, and recalls the time he brought a young Kelvin to his gym. Kelvin was eager to fight the gym's top contender, only to be swiftly defeated. Yet, instead of being discouraged, Kelvin's defeat ignited a fierce desire to train harder, leading him to victory in his first Fist King tournament. 6 years later, that fire still burns. In the first match, Herman's punches bounce off Geese like pebbles, and Geese, bored and annoyed, ends the fight with a single punch. The announcer hypes him up as possibly the strongest sponsored fighter in history. Angelica and Rick note Geese's power, but find his amateurish movements odd. The rest of the matches proceed without much trouble, with Rick, Braun, and Angelica winning handily. When the champion Kelvin faces Eddie, the crowd is buzzing with anticipation. Eddie tries to strike first, but Kelvin counters with uncanny precision, almost as if he knew the attack was coming. Rick is amazed, but Braun explains that Kelvin has trained his sense of smell to the point where he can detect changes in his opponent's adrenaline and electric signals, effectively predicting their next move, a technique they dub Fort. Kelvin then playfully allows Eddie to land a hit before taking him down with a single, decisive blow. Rick realizes that Kelvin had been toying with his opponent all along. As the next round looms, Rick is eager to see the fruits of Angelica's training. Snape, ever the opportunist, takes a seat beside Rick, opting to watch the match up close since it's between his brother and his fiancée. Before the match, Geese fails to recognize Angelica as his opponent, only recalling that his brother told him not to damage her face since she's to be his future wife. Angelica, incensed by his arrogance, vows to beat him senseless. In the arena, the match begins, and Angelica's initial kick does little to faze Geese. Dodging his counter, she realizes that conventional attacks won't work. To everyone's shock, she cancels her strengthening magic and unleashes a technique called Mono Reflex Inversion. Charging at Geese with Blink Step, she manages to land a blow, slashing his gut and proving she's not to be underestimated. Rionette reveals the secret behind Angelica's unique technique. Thread cut, a hidden art of body control that involves releasing a potent burst of stored energy. During training, Rionette wowed everyone by slicing a stone in half, leaving Angelica feeling intimidated but inspired. Fueled by determination, Angelica pushed past her insecurities and created her own spin on the move, blending magic flow with a little trick she calls reverse reflection. Rionette warns that Thread Cut packs a wallop more powerful than standard moves, but Rick confidently vouches that Angelica's intense training has toughened her up for the impact. Rionette points out that nobody else could pull off Thread Cut like Angelica, especially since she fuses it with her instant step technique. Meanwhile, Angelica charges in, repeating her strategy and slicing her opponent's belly, only to stoke his fury. The reptile fighter, Geeth, slams the ground, whipping up a dust cloud to obscure Angelica's vision before launching a sneak attack. Angelica deftly dodges, reverts to her game plan, and lands another cut on Geeth's torso. Snape, observing from the sidelines, notes the intriguing move but remains unfazed by his fighter's wounds. Frustrated, Geeth kicks up dust again and catches Angelica with a crushing blow that smashes her into the wall. Geeth apologizes to Snape for getting carried away, admitting he couldn't resist the thrill of battling such an entertaining foe. Snape, used to his brother's fiery nature, doesn't intervene. Angelica, bruised but unbroken, shakes off the hit and attempts another thread cut, only to be knocked back by Geeth's tail. As Angelica keeps pushing, Geeth grows impatient and reveals he's mastered her instant step after watching her in action. Now running side by side with Angelica, Geeth ambushes her with a series of brutal strikes, slamming her against the wall yet again. He mocks her efforts, calling her training a joke and ridiculing her lineage, insisting that the apple doesn't fall far from the talentless tree. Snape casually adds that while Angelica might think the fights are rigged, the real hustle is betting on his brother, an unknown wild card nobody else gambled on, guaranteeing them a big payday. Back in the arena, Geeth unleashes a relentless barrage of attacks, determined to crush Angelica's resolve. Though beaten and battered, she refuses to surrender. Just when Geeth is about to land the final blow, Rick tosses his shoe, derailing the attack. Incensed, Geeth confronts Rick, who nonchalantly ties his shoe and steps up to fight. Geeth eagerly anticipates a brawl, but Rick shuts him down with one swift move. Rick then checks on Angelica, finding that despite her severe injuries, she's still very much alive and kicking. Meanwhile, other fighters advance, and the competition narrows down to the final four. The next morning, Rick hits the training grounds early and runs into Angelica, who's second-guessing her decision to rebel against her noble duties. Regretful and unsure, she voices her doubts. Rick, feeling guilty for misjudging Geeth, asks her to keep her eyes on his next match. In the semifinal showdown, Geeth taunts Rick, saying he should have put Angelica out of her misery. Furious, Rick shuts him up with a bone-crunching punch that catches Geeth off guard. Jeeth lashes out but ends up coughing up blood after another strike. Angelica is stunned by Rick's technique, and Rionette explains that Rick's using a nasty little move that targets internal structures. Talk about hitting where it hurts. Realizing he's outmatched, Jeeth powers up with Dragon Force, cranking up his strength and speed. Braun notes that the move probably drains a ton of magic, and Snape casually mentions his brother never bothered training to boost his magic reserves. Rick throws another internal punch, but Jeeth blocks it with Iron Body, taking no damage. Now supercharged, Jeeth pummels Rick with a flurry of blows. Snape smugly suggests the outcome set, but Braun thinks Rick's playing a different game altogether. Despite Jeeth's fury, Rick barely flinches thanks to his Fluid Strikes ability, which spreads the impact of hits across his body, leaving him unscathed. Jeeth accuses Rick of holding back, and Rick admits he's been dialing down his powers to match Angelica's level, aiming to inspire her rather than just rack up a win. Brune chimes in, saying Rick's endgame isn't just victory, it's about lighting a fire under Angelica. Rick warns Jeeth that his rage-fueled assault will eventually backfire, but Jeeth, ever stubborn, won't listen. Determined not to lose, Jeeth layers Iron Body, Strong Fist, and Instant Step into a brutal combo, turning himself into a one-man wrecking crew. But Rick's next penetrating strike shatters Jeeth's defenses like glass. Jeeth, now exhausted and vulnerable, gets a lecture from Rick. He's never pushed past his comfort zone and doesn't know how to handle fatigue. Rick believes real strength is forged through sheer effort. Jeeth, fuming, throws himself back into the fight, but Rick's got his number. Rick mocks Jeeth's over-reliance on natural talent, calling him a mere level 1 prodigy. He explains that true prodigies use their raw talent as a launch pad, reaching staggering heights through relentless effort. He even drops a flex about knowing level 1000 prodigies who'd mop the floor with Jeeth. Jeeth, raging at Rick's jabs, unleashes Dragon Requiem, his ultimate power-up, rendering Rick's strikes useless. Rick admits that Angelica, at her current level, would have stood no chance against this form, but he stresses that training is crucial. Sometimes you're stuck facing opponents you just can't outrun. To hammer the point home, Rick blazes around the arena using Instant Step, showing Angelica what's possible if she keeps grinding. He acknowledges that talent can be unbeatable, but it takes a special brand of crazy to keep pushing the limits of hard work. Angelica gets the message loud and clear, reigniting her determination. Desperate, Jeeth kicks up a sandstorm to blind Rick. Undeterred, Rick attempts a thread cut, even though he's not entirely confident in pulling it off. When the dust settles, Jeeth is left battered and broken, signaling the end of the fight and proving Rick's point. Sheer willpower and relentless training can cut through even the toughest obstacles. Angelica noticed Snape's oddly calm demeanor as he admitted that the brutal loss hadn't hurt as much as expected. In fact, he found solace in seeing his brother learn a tough lesson, the same boxer who had once ended his own career, thinking he was invincible thanks to his monstrous talent. Alice remarked on Snape's heavy-hearted musings, and Missa playfully added that this was just one of those grown-up burdens. Snape confessed he felt less devastated by the defeat than he'd thought, but regretted losing Angelica Damo as his potential bride. Meanwhile, Angelica couldn't have been happier about the Dragonkin's downfall, gleefully reminding Snape that his dreams of nobility had just crumbled along with his proposal. With polished grace and refined speech, Snape admitted that having a maiden like Damu by his side was a desire he couldn't deny, and his words sparked a strange reaction in Lampo. Elsewhere, Kerwin the wolf was getting ready to enter the ring, feeling on top of the world. His boss praised him as a stellar boxer, to which Kerwin jokingly suggested the old man might have eaten something bad to be this sentimental. But it wasn't about that. His boss just wanted him to give it his all. The second match of the semifinals was announced, pitting Brune Ash, the orc who KO'd all his opponents with a single punch, against the 3-time champion and fan favorite, Kerwin. Kerwin, though confident, knew he was up against a beast of an opponent. The orc looked less like a fighter and more like an unbreakable wall. Kerwin launched a flurry of lightning-fast punches that barely fazed Brune, whose return blow would have been lethal had it connected. But then, something totally unexpected happened. Jeeth Resurrect, living up to his name, rose from the ashes with glowing red eyes. Leaping into the crowd, he stirred chaos with a barrage of strikes. Snape recognized this as the devastating dragon roaring in Jeeth's blood and braced himself for the worst. Kerwin, eager to continue his match, called out Jeeth for interrupting, and when Jeeth charged at him, Kerwin coolly countered with a gut punch that sent the dragonkin crashing down with just one hit. Rick, Angelica, and Rionette watched in stunned silence, now convinced Kerwin must be an S-rank fighter. Due to the chaos in the audience, the event host postponed the semi-final to the next day to prioritize the injured. Although Kerwin was disappointed about pausing when he was in peak form, he rolled with the punches. Brune, however, sensed doubt in his opponent's fists, and his words landed a mental blow on the reigning champ. Later, the Orich Hullum Fist team gathered at their usual haunt, the Militia Tavern, minus Rick, who'd gone for a jog to Clarissa territory, a casual 700m round trip. Rick eventually reached the kingdom's borders, and there he stumbled upon Kerwin, peacefully training in a secluded spot. Rick asked if Kerwin wasn't worried about overworking himself before tomorrow's match, but Kerwin seemed more interested in using Rick as a sparring partner. Without hesitation, Kerwin invited the old man to fight, and Rick responded with a lightning-fast punch, only for Kerwin to block it effortlessly. Intrigued, Rick wondered why Kerwin took a hit during the tournament when he could have easily avoided it. Rick guessed that Kerwin's senses might have been dulled, but the truth was darker. Kerwin confessed he grew up in the slums, where fighting was his favorite pastime, until he defeated everyone so brutally that it lost its thrill. In Herotopia, things went well initially, but after winning his second championship, knocking out all challengers in seconds, even official tournaments became dull. The only spark was the joy his boss took in his victories. But one day, Kerwin overheard a conversation where his boss lamented how his dominant performances were killing their business. People wouldn't pay for predictable outcomes. On the eve of his third tournament final, Kerwin found himself wondering how he could save his master's gym from ruin. Kerwin toyed with the idea of spicing up his matches by dialing down his strength for the crowd's sake. The first punch that came his way moved in slow motion, but he let it connect, selling the drama with a fake knockout. He kept up this charade in future tournaments, holding back just enough to keep the audience on the edge of their seats, even though his own thrill for fighting had dimmed. Rick understood Kerwin's angle, but warned him that tomorrow's bout would be a whole different beast. Orwolf, not buying it, wasn't interested in a debate, and Rick left it at that. The next day, a defensive spell was cast to keep the audience safe, just in case things got dicey. When the match kicked off, Kerwin charged at Braun, amping things up with his rolling fang technique, a punch powered by a rapid arm spin like a human drill. Braun blocked it, but this time it wasn't the cakewalk he was used to. Switching gears, Braun dodged Kerwin's attacks and countered with quick jabs, keeping Kerwin dancing to avoid being squashed. After a brief standoff, Braun analyzed Kerwin's style and called him out for pulling his punches, and Kerwin awkwardly fessed up. He admitted he might need to ditch that strategy, knowing full well it wasn't how a real champ should act. But Braun saw it differently, respecting the effort Kerwin put into making the fights entertaining. To level the playing field, Braun decided to fight using only 2 fingers without moving from his spot. Kerwin charged with another rolling fang, but Braun stopped it with just his index and middle fingers, then landed a hit that sent Kerwin scrambling. Barely dodging the next blow, Kerwin heard the crowd chant his name, and suddenly the thrill returned. Just then, Kerwin's boss yelled from the sidelines, accusing him of holding back. A businessman with dreams of training the world's strongest boxer, he urged Kerwin to quit the charades. Those words hit Kerwin like a slap in the face. Fired up, he unleashed a powerful punch that forced Braun to defend with his whole hand. Kerwin went all in, but Braun soon had him cornered, forcing Kerwin to activate his iron body technique to avoid getting flattened. The crowd watched, torn between cheering for Kerwin's show of power and feeling duped by his past theatrics. But Kerwin couldn't care less about public opinion anymore. He let loose with a mix of spells, from Flame Wave to Forest Rope. In a final, jaw-dropping move, Kerwin summoned Angel's Tear, an enormous spell that formed a colossal energy mass in the sky. Rick, sensing the danger, braced himself, knowing Braun would have to get serious. In response, Braun threw a punch so fierce it tore through the spell, turning Angel's Tear to dust. Raising his hand in the Orc's quarter signal, Braun declared that from now on, the fight had no rules. For the first time, Kerwin felt a chill run down his spine. Dodging a punch, he was knocked back by the sheer force of Braun's attack, barely managing to stay on his feet. Exhausted and out of magic, Kerwin was left wide open. A gut-wrenching punch from Braun left him gasping as if his insides were rearranged. Using his last ounce of strength, he charged back, swinging wildly, but his stamina quickly fizzled out. Despite the trickery, the crowd roared for Kerwin to keep fighting, proving he still had their support. Their cheers reignited his resolve. With no magic or strength left, Kerwin tapped into his spirit for one last punch, combining all his techniques: Instant Step, Strong Fist, Rolling Fang, and Flame Sword into a final, desperate attack. As Kerwin's ultimate punch was effortlessly absorbed, he grinned, admitting that this was the most fun he'd ever had. To end the epic battle, Braun delivered a knockout punch that put Kerwin down for good. But despite the loss, Kerwin's master still hailed him as the greatest boxer in history, proud that his student had finally fought with everything he had. After Braun's big win, he heads backstage, where Rick and Angelica greet him with congratulations. Since Braun is moving on to the finals, the group is guaranteed the jewel no matter what. Rick, clearly not interested in becoming a punching bag for Braun, announces he's dropping out of the final match. But Braun, ever the fan of a good brawl, tells Rick he's not allowed to back out so easily. His hair practically starts falling out from the stress of fighting Braun. Meanwhile, Kerwin is recovering, casually flipping through a newspaper article about his recent match. The public is apparently ticked off, realizing Kerwin's been holding back this whole time. While he contemplates whether his days as a role model are over, the group of kids outside still treat him like a hero. The innkeeper reassures Kerwin that the crowd isn't holding any grudges and also points out that Kerwin's unexpected power in the last match was impressive. Even Kerwin didn't know he had it in him. Sure, he lost, but the innkeeper shrugs it off, saying it just means more time in the gym. Kerwin appreciates the support and finally asks why the innkeeper's always so nice to him. Turns out, the guy thinks of Kerwin like a son, and he'd do anything for him. Cue the sentimental moment interrupted by Braun, who walks in mid-heart to heart. Apologizing for barging in, he asks Kerwin how he's holding up. With his bones barely intact, Kerwin turns down Braun's offer to heal him, saying he wants to enjoy the rare sensation of pain. Despite losing, Kerwin is looking forward to seeing Rick and Braun duke it out in the finals. On the other side of town, Snake shows up at Rick's inn, only to find Rick barricaded in his room like a teenager avoiding chores. Angelica is outside, trying to coax him out, but Rick's convinced he's as good as dead if he faces Braun. Snake understands his fear, but he also knows the whole crowd is dying to see the match, so it'd be great if Rick could step up. Rick, ever the survivalist, says he's not risking his life for a tournament, no matter how many people are watching. Snake, not one to give up easily, delivers a dramatic monologue about all the hard work and money poured into the tournament, and how it'll all go to waste if Rick backs out now. Rick feels a pang of guilt but still refuses to budge. Angelica tries a different tactic, saying, "Hey, no biggie, if you die you can just be resurrected." Rick is less than amused and tells her she has no idea what dying feels like. Angelica eventually gives up, declaring she's lost all respect for him as a teacher. Once she leaves, Mazette tries his hand at convincing Rick. He brings up the training plan Braun had for Rick from day one. Rick hadn't really thought about it before, But Mazette explains that Braun designed that plan ages ago to train someone to fight him at full strength. See, in orc culture, combat is the ultimate way to bond, but Braun's too powerful to have a proper fistfight without killing his opponent. So, he's been dreaming of the day someone could finally go toe-to-toe with him. Rick's free to withdraw if he wants, but Mazette gently reminds him that Braun has been looking forward to this fight. It would be a shame to disappoint him. Rick flashes back to the day they first met. From a simple handshake, Braun immediately knew Rick had zero martial arts training and practically no mana. He warned Rick that if he ever wanted to be a real adventurer, he'd need to train 100 times harder than everyone else. Not exactly a confidence boost. Back in the present, Angelica is still fuming, calling Rick pathetic for being so scared of Braun. Mazette, though disappointed, gets it who in their right mind would voluntarily train under Braun, let alone fight him. Angelica, still skeptical, asks if Braun's training routine is really that bad. Mazette confirms it was an absolute nightmare, and frankly, it's a miracle Rick didn't lose his mind after enduring it all. Though Rick had lost his cool in the past, Angelica is starting to realize just how tough he's had it. Despite lacking any standout abilities, he's survived intense training. But Alice cuts in, surprising Angelica with the revelation that Rick does have a skill, it's just one he's never seen used. Mazette then drops the bombshell. Rick's ability is tricky to activate and comes with a brutal cost to his body. Brost, knowing Rick's lack of control, banned him from using it. Later that evening, Rynette visits Rick, and he nervously asks if she thinks he's a coward for dodging his upcoming fight with Brost. She reassures him, saying she understands his hesitation and doesn't think he's pathetic, but adds that she'd admire him even more if he faced Brost head-on. The next day, as the tournament kicks off, the crowd buzzes with excitement. The announcer lists the prizes: cash, jewels, and a romantic trip to a hot spring. Rynette and Angelica check in on Rick, and though he says he's fine, his face screams otherwise. That's when Rynette steps up, sweetening the deal. If Rick puts on a good show in the fight, she'll personally reward him. From that moment, Rick's laser-focused. As he enters the arena to face Brost, he declares that he's giving it everything he's got. The fight starts with Rick moving at speeds too fast to follow, leaving Brost bleeding after a series of lightning-fast attacks. The spectators, including Snape, are utterly baffled, unable to comprehend what just happened. Mazette explains that Rick outpaced Brost with a whirlwind of moves, finishing with a deadly thread slash that cut into Brost's arm. Rick doesn't let up, throwing punches at Brost, who blocks and counters. Rick backs off, then uses the arena walls to launch a kick, only for Brost to block again. Another thread slash lands, slicing Brost's stomach. Angelica, trained by Rick herself, is impressed by how hard both fighters have worked to reach this level. But she can't help but wonder what sparked Rick's sudden resolve. When she asks Rynette, the answer is, Rynette admits she promised to go with Rick on the couple's trip to the hot spring if he won, and that's all the motivation he needed. Rick's relentless attacks finally push Brost to unleash his full power. He winds up for a punch so strong that Rick has to leap away, a reminder of why he was afraid to face Brost in the first place. Brost then unleashes a flurry of punches, but Rick dodges most until Brost sneaks behind him for a direct hit. Just before it lands, Rick casts an air cushion spell, redirecting the punch. The crowd is stunned. Rick blocked Brost's punch with a basic spell and cast it instantly without any preparation or incantation, a feat not even Brost can pull off. Rick credits Alice and Mazette for teaching him instant casting. They back him up, joking that Rick almost vaporized himself while learning, but it paid off. The fight resumes, with Rick dodging Brost's shockwave and charging in for another attack. Brost blocks and counters, sending Rick flying, but he rebounds off the rubble for another assault. The spectators think Rick's making a huge mistake, giving Brost plenty of time to counter. But just as Brost throws his signature hurricane punch, Rick leaps into the air to dodge. With Rick seemingly vulnerable mid-air, Brost gears up for another strike. But Rick, ever resourceful, uses air cushion again to dodge and fires off an air shot at Brost. When the dust clears, Brost is mostly unharmed. Before resuming the fight, Brost compliments Rick's growth over the 2 years they've known each other, acknowledging the brutal training Rick endured. Compliments from Brost are rare, so Rick knows they're heartfelt. However, Rick also realizes Brost is yearning for an opponent who can truly match him. Recalling Alice and Mizette's stories about Brost's dream of fighting an equal, Rick sees through Brost's attempts to downplay it. Out of respect for all Brost has done for him, Rick promises to give him the fight he's been waiting for. Brost, clearly touched, smiles and decides it's time to reveal the secrets of the war Shalom Fist. Rick has proven himself worthy. 46 years ago, when Braun was just a 5-year-old orc, he already knew he wasn't like the others. Sure, he was stronger than the rest, but it wasn't just that he was also smarter. This intelligence made it tough for him to truly connect with his fellow orcs. In an effort to fit in, he tried teaching them useful things like how to make a fire or build a house. Thanks to Braun's efforts, Orc society made some impressive strides. But instead of bonding with them, his brethren started treating him like a god, which only further isolated him. One stormy day, while Braun was away, disaster struck. Every last orc in his pack was wiped out by an accident caused by the storm. When Braun returned, he found himself standing among the dead, his entire family gone. But instead of sorrow or rage, he felt nothing. That was the moment he realized just how truly alone he was in the world. Later, while reading by the fire, having just taken down a wyvern like it was no big deal, Braun was rudely interrupted by a man who came charging out of the bushes, sword drawn. Braun easily dodged the attack, leaving the man stunned. After all, orcs weren't exactly known for their agility, or their literacy, for that matter. But here was Braun, not only reading a book, but having slain a wyvern terrorizing a nearby village. Embarrassed, the man apologized, explaining he was on a quest to exterminate the orcs in the area. Braun shrugged it off, he was used to humans being quick to attack. The man, intrigued by this unusually calm and capable orc, sat down for a chat. Hours later, the man had Braun's entire life story. The loneliness, the isolation, the dream of finding someone strong enough to challenge him in a fight. Braun had it all, except for an equal. The man understood. He had a dream of his own that was just out of reach. He once fought alongside a hero named Yamato, a legend Braun had read about in a book. Yamato's story was supposedly over 200 years old, so you can imagine Braun's surprise when the man casually mentioned that he was the one who wrote the book. Apparently, the tales were all true, including the man's current goal of defeating Kaiser Alpia. This piqued Braun's interest. Maybe defeating Kaiser would bring him closer to finding a true rival. And so, they formed the Orichalcum Fist Party, and as word spread, strong fighters began to join. Yet despite their skills, none could give Braun the fistfight he craved. Undeterred, Braun created a brutal training regimen to help his new comrades reach his level. But Mazette, one of the group's more level-headed members, took one look at it and told Braun straight up, no one alive could survive this. Realizing Mazette was right, Braun abandoned his dream of finding a worthy opponent until now. As he squared off against Rick, who had been training alongside him for some time, Braun apologized for derailing the fight with his long-winded backstory. Rick, however, was lost in thought. Braun wanted a pure fist fight, but so far, Rick had relied on magic and quick maneuvers. Then, he remembered Braun's story about the orc tradition of the quarter thumbs up, a gesture that meant both fighters would abandon all defense and focus solely on trading blows. Though he might regret it later, Rick extended his hand, signaling his readiness for the brutal exchange. Braun was floored. Internally, Rick was already apologizing to himself, and to Renette there was no way he was coming out of this fight in one piece. Renette, watching from the sidelines, found it endearing that Rick was willing to risk it all to fulfill Braun's dream. Braun returned the quarter thumbs up, and they launched into the fight, each landing devastating punches on the other. The sheer force of their battle began to crack the magical barrier around the arena. Seeing this, Mazette asked Alice to assist with some magic, and together, they teleported the spectators out of harm's way, except for Kerwin, who Mazette figured could handle the fallout. The barrier finally shattered as Rick and Braun continued trading explosive blows. After a particularly brutal exchange, Rick found himself face first in the dirt after a backflip gone wrong. As he struggled to rise, bruised and battered, Rick's mind raced back to his training. He wasn't about to let this fight end just yet. Rick charges at Braun again, throwing a wild punch with everything he's got. Braun, of course, counters with his own, and the two keep swinging, fists slamming into each other's faces. Braun's clearly getting a kick out of this. He punches Rick so hard that the poor guy flies into a wall, taking a chunk of the stadium with him. It looks like Rick is down for the count. He's barely got the strength to twitch a finger. Rick figures he's done well enough, given that he was up against a powerhouse like Braun, and maybe now he can limp home and take a well-earned nap. But Braun? Oh no, he's not done yet. The guy looks like he's just getting warmed up. Rick's body, on the other hand, is a wreck. Angelica's convinced there's no way he can keep going, but the others know better. Rick's still got some gas in the tank. For Braun, this is just a friendly fistfight. For Rick, it's a whole trial of endurance, self-worth, and grit. Sure, he's not quite on Braun's level yet, but that just means he's got to push harder. So, Rick clenches his fists, and boom, a fiery red aura bursts out around him. Surprise! Turns out, Rick's got a secret skill no one told Braun about, and now he's using it. Braun is floored metaphorically, for now because he had no idea Rick could pull this off. Apparently, the rest of the crew trained Rick in secret, so he could harness his skill at the right moment. The condition to activate it. Facing off against someone way stronger than him, and it's not fueled by magic or strength, but pure, unshakable willpower. Rick charges in again, fists blazing with power, and smashes into Braun with a punch way stronger than before. Braun hits back, but this time Rick doesn't get blown away. He stands his ground. As they fight, Braun has an epiphany. He always thought finding someone on his level would make him feel less lonely. But now he realizes he's never been alone. He's got friends who went to great lengths just to make him happy, and that means the world to him. As the brawl drags on, both fighters start to run on fumes. The next hit is going to decide it all. Summoning the last bits of their strength, they charge at each other for one final blow, a massive headbutt that could probably be felt in the next town over. When the dust settles, both Rick and Braun are still standing. Rick lets out a laugh, complimenting Braun on being, well, ridiculous. Even after throwing everything at him, Rick still couldn't bring him down. Then, Rick collapses, but before Braun follows suit, he tells Rick, "You didn't lose, man. The only reason the fight ended like this is because you respected my dream of a fair fistfight. Honestly, if anyone won, it's you." Braun collapses right after, both of them out cold. Some time later, Rick wakes up in the hospital, the champion's belt sitting on his chest, with Rionette by his side. Turns out, Rick's been out for 3 days, and everyone was starting to get a little anxious. But hey, considering last time he used his skill he was out for a full week. This is progress. Rick is glad to be awake, but he's confused. Why does he have the belt? He distinctly remembers going down first. Apparently, Braun insisted Rick take it, saying he was the real victor. Rick's flattered, but let's be real, Braun is like a Dark Souls boss. The guy probably had 2 more health bars and a secret healing spell up his sleeve. Sure, Rick held his own, but if Braun had pulled out all the stops, Rick knows he would have been toast. Braun reassures Rick, telling him he's stronger than he thinks. He also thanks the crew for training Rick, though they all try to downplay their involvement. Rick, meanwhile, had no clue this was the plan all along, and he's pretty surprised. With their mission wrapped up, Braun pulls out the jewel from the champion's belt and hands it to Rionette. She whips out a perfect fake to replace it, and Alice uses her magic to give it a boost, making it indistinguishable from the real deal. Angelica decides to just not ask questions. At this point, Rick remembers something and asks Braun about Reinhard, the guy from his flashback. Braun doesn't know Reinhard's exact age, but he explains that Reinhard's skill stops him from aging much. Rick wonders if he's off on some epic mission. But nah, Reinhard's just dodging his publisher because he's way behind on a book deadline. Later that night, Snake meets with Kerwin to tell him that both Rick and Braun turned down the champion title and returned the belt. Kerwin's next in line for the title, but he's not exactly thrilled about being champion again because of a technicality. The next morning, as the gang gets ready to head home, Rick realizes he packed way too much food, so they had to get a carriage to haul it. Alice is sad Angelica has to leave, but Angelica promises to visit soon, especially since she wants Braun to train her. Rick, shocked, asks if she has a death wish. But Angelica, fully aware she might have to die a few times to get stronger, is more than ready. She plans to not only catch up to Rick but surpass him, and Rick can't wait to see how strong she'll be when they meet again. Angelica teases Rick about his plan to run back home, pointing out that it's 3,000 kilometers away. Rick, ever the overachiever, says he ran here in 3 days, no big deal. But Angelica reminds him that the goods he bought will take months to arrive by horse. Alice steps in, saying it's not a problem, Maylette can just hit the horse with some magical rocket fuel, and they're good to go. As Rick's about to leave, Rionette stops him, asking when they're going to take that hot spring trip. Flustered, Rick says he didn't win the fight, so he doesn't feel right accepting such a reward. Mazette, amused, proposes a race back to the castle. If Rick wins, they go on the trip. If he loses, he has to do 100 times the training. Rick doesn't like the sound of that and tries to negotiate the training down to 10 times. But before he can finish, Mazette and Braun have already taken off. Rick chases after them. If you enjoyed watching Rick take punches, activate his hidden powers, and nearly collapse from exhaustion, make sure to hit subscribe and like. It's way easier than surviving 100x the training.